Imagine spending your whole life nurturing everyone else's dreams, raising children, keeping a home, working hard day after day, while quietly tucking your own passions away for another time. Now imagine finally, at the age of 85, picking up a paintbrush for the very first time and watching as your artwork captures the hearts of thousands of people around the world. That's exactly what happened to Margaret Stevens. Margaret was born and raised in a small, quiet town in Ohio. She was the kind of woman who embodied dedication, a loving wife, a devoted mother of 4, and a doting grandmother. Her life was a patchwork of selflessness, school lunches packed with care, endless laundry loads, Sunday family dinners that filled the house with laughter and the scent of roasted chicken. Her world was full of warmth and love, but also routine. There was always something that needed her attention, always someone who came first. And through it all, Margaret harbored a secret wish. Ever since she was a little girl, she had dreamed of being an artist. She remembered standing in front of shop windows, gazing longingly at sets of oil paints and blank canvases, imagining the beautiful pictures she would one day create. But there was never time. There were diapers to change, bills to pay, meals to cook, and a million other responsibilities that seemed more urgent than a little girl's quiet dream. Years turned into decades. The dream never disappeared, but it sat quietly on a shelf, gathering dust while life moved on. Margaret would sometimes talk about painting, usually in passing, as if it were a silly fantasy rather than a real possibility. Maybe someday, she'd say with a smile, even though deep down she wasn't sure if someday would ever come. But everything changed when Margaret turned 85. One chilly afternoon, while sipping tea and flipping through a magazine, she stumbled across an article about a woman her age who had taken up photography late in life and found immense joy in it. Margaret felt a jolt of something she hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. She looked at her hands, older now, with veins and wrinkles that told a lifetime of stories, and thought, why not me? Why not now? That simple question stirred something deep inside her. Later that week, with quiet determination, she visited the local craft store. She stood in front of the aisle of paints and brushes, heart pounding, and finally picked out a small starter kit. A few basic colors, a couple of brushes, and a tiny canvas. As she checked out, her hands trembled, but her spirit soared. That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she had served countless meals over the years, and squeezed a small dab of blue paint onto her palette. She dipped her brush in, her heart racing, and made her first stroke across the canvas. It was messy, uneven, awkward, and it was magical. Margaret didn't know then that this simple moment, her quiet act of bravery, would lead to something extraordinary. She didn't know that within months, her paintings would be shared online, gathering thousands of likes and comments from people all over the world who were touched by her vibrant, heartfelt art. How did a woman who had never held a paintbrush until the age of 85 become an online sensation? Proof that dreams really can bloom at any age. If you're still here, feel free to subscribe, because Margaret's beautiful journey is just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single brushstroke. Margaret Stevens' life was a tapestry woven with love, sacrifice, and quiet strength. Born in 1938 in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town, she was the eldest of 5 children and quickly learned the art of responsibility. From an early age, Margaret helped her mother care for her younger siblings, often putting their needs before her own. It was a lesson that carried into adulthood, becoming a defining part of who she was. At 22, Margaret married John Stevens, a hardworking man who shared her values of family and faith. Together, they built a simple but beautiful life. Their home, a small white house with blue shutters, always smelled of fresh-baked bread and sounded with the laughter of children. Margaret dedicated herself wholeheartedly to raising their 4 kids, pouring every ounce of her energy into creating a warm, loving home. She was the kind of woman who never missed a school play or a baseball game, who knew the names of all her children's teachers and baked cookies for every neighborhood fundraiser. Her days were filled with endless chores, laundry, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, but Margaret never complained. She found joy in the little things, a freshly ironed shirt, the way the sun filtered through her lace curtains in the afternoon, the hugs and kisses of her children at bedtime. And yet, tucked away deep in her heart, there was always a quiet longing. Whenever she passed by the small art store downtown, she couldn't help but linger at the window, her eyes tracing the rows of paint tubes and blank canvases. She would imagine what it might feel like to hold a brush, to watch colors blend and take shape under her own hand. Sometimes, when the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, she would sit with a cup of tea and sketch simple flowers or landscapes on scraps of paper, using nothing but an old pencil. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the spark alive. But time, as it does, kept moving. There was always a reason to put her dream aside, a new baby to care for, bills to pay, John's long work hours that meant she needed to hold everything together. Later came grandchildren, family gatherings, and then the quiet responsibilities of growing older. Whenever someone asked if she had any hobbies or personal dreams, Margaret would smile and say, "Oh, nothing important. Maybe one day I'll take up painting." She said it so often that it became a kind of mantra, something sweet but, to her mind, unlikely. As the years passed and her children grew into adults with lives of their own, Margaret continued to be the family's anchor. She was the one everyone called for advice, the heart of every holiday gathering, the keeper of family stories and traditions. But even as her hair turned silver and her hands began to show the delicate signs of age, that quiet longing never faded. Little did she know, the dream she had so carefully tucked away for nearly a lifetime was patiently waiting, ready to bloom when the moment was finally right. The turning point came on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the sky is impossibly blue and every leaf seems to glow with its own golden light. Margaret was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, sipping chamomile tea, when her granddaughter Lily burst through the front door, holding a brightly colored flyer. "Grandma," Lily said excitedly, waving the paper. "There's an art class starting at the community center next week. It's for beginners, no experience needed. You have to come with me." Margaret chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh, honey, that's sweet of you to ask, but I'm far too old to start something like that now." Lily's face fell for a moment, but then she sat down beside Margaret and took her hand. "Grandma, you've told me my whole life how much you wanted to learn to paint. Why not now? You always say it's never too late to dream." Margaret looked into her granddaughter's earnest eyes and felt a pang of truth. She had spent so many years encouraging her family to follow their passions, to take risks and believe in themselves. But here she was, faced with her own dream, and she was hesitating. That night, after Lily had gone home, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the flyer. She stood by the window, watching the moon rise over her quiet neighborhood, and whispered to herself, "If not now, when?" The next morning, with her heart pounding in her chest, she called the community center and signed up. The week leading up to the class was a whirlwind of emotions. Margaret felt excited, nervous, and more than a little doubtful. She kept asking herself, would I even be able to hold a brush steady? What if everyone else is younger and better? What if I make a fool of myself? But deep down, something stronger than fear pushed her forward. When the day finally arrived, Margaret dressed carefully, choosing her favorite cardigan and a comfortable pair of slacks. She packed a small notebook and a pencil, and as she walked through the doors of the community center, she felt like a schoolgirl on her very first day. The room was bright and welcoming, filled with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. There were people of all ages, some as young as teenagers, others closer to her own age. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Emily, greeted Margaret warmly. "We're so glad you're here," she said with a smile that instantly put Margaret at ease. As she settled into her seat and picked up a brush for the first time, Margaret felt a jolt of something electric, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She dipped the brush into a pool of soft blue paint, her hand trembling slightly, and made her first stroke on the canvas. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even very good, but it was hers. And in that moment, Margaret knew that something had shifted. She had stepped across an invisible line, a line she had drawn for herself long ago, and discovered that on the other side was not fear, but freedom. What she didn't know yet was just how far that first little brushstroke would take her. Margaret's first few weeks in the art class were a blend of wonder and frustration. Every Tuesday afternoon, she would walk to the community center with a tote bag full of paints, brushes, and a nervous excitement that never seemed to fade. Each session was a new challenge, a new opportunity to push herself out of the comfort zone she had lived in for so long. At first, the learning curve felt steep. Holding the paintbrush, Margaret realized that painting was both simpler and more complicated than she had imagined. Her hands, a little less steady with age, sometimes made lines wobble where she had meant them to be smooth. Blending colors was tricky, and there were days when her canvas felt more like a patchwork of mistakes than a work of art. She found herself comparing her progress to others in the class, especially the younger participants, who seemed to pick up techniques effortlessly. It was hard not to feel discouraged sometimes. Margaret would glance at her own messy attempts at landscapes or still lives and think, maybe I'm just not cut out for this after all. But then something wonderful happened. One afternoon, as she sat at her easel struggling to capture the delicate petals of a sunflower, Emily, the instructor, walked over and stood quietly behind her. After a moment, Emily said, "Margaret, look at those colors. You have a beautiful eye for warmth and depth." Margaret blinked in surprise. "Really? I thought it looked like a mess." Emily smiled gently. "It's not about perfection. It's about expression. And you're expressing something real and lovely." Those words stayed with Margaret. Slowly, she began to shift her mindset. Instead of focusing on making her paintings perfect, she allowed herself to focus on the feeling of it, the joy of dipping her brush into rich, vibrant paint, the calm that came from watching a blank canvas slowly come to life. She started experimenting more, playing with bold colors, layering textures, and painting whatever inspired her, whether it was the flowers from her garden, the swirling sky she saw in her dreams, or simple still lives from her kitchen table. Margaret also began to notice small victories. Her hand grew steadier. Her confidence blossomed. One day, after finishing a painting of a vase of roses, she stood back and actually smiled with pride. This feels like me," she whispered. At home, she set up a small corner by her window as her personal art studio. The sunlight would stream in as she painted, and the rhythmic swish of her brush quickly became her favorite sound. Painting brought her a peace she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of being fully present, fully alive. Her family noticed the change too. "Grandma, you seem so happy lately," Lily said one weekend, admiring a new painting. Margaret beamed. "I am, sweetheart. I really am." She wasn't sure what would come of her new hobby, and truthfully, she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was creating just for the sheer joy of it. And that, she realized, was its own kind of masterpiece. As Margaret's confidence grew, so did her collection of finished paintings. What started as shaky brushstrokes on small canvases began to transform into vibrant pieces full of personality and life. Her little studio by the window now looked like a miniature gallery, with paintings leaning against walls and drying on every available surface. Her family couldn't help but notice the change, not just in her home, but in Margaret herself. One Sunday afternoon, her children and grandchildren gathered for their usual family dinner. As they stepped inside, they were greeted by a colorful display. Margaret had lined up several of her recent paintings along the hallway, a quiet but proud invitation to take a look. "Wow, Grandma," Lily gasped, stopping in front of a landscape that showed a golden field under a bright, swirling sky. "This is amazing." Margaret blushed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, it's nothing fancy, just something I've been working on." Her son, David, stepped closer to inspect a painting of vibrant tulips in a mason jar. "Mom, these are incredible. I had no idea you were doing all this." Margaret smiled softly. "Neither did I, really. I guess it's never too late to find out what you can do." The family spent the next hour moving from painting to painting, asking questions, and listening to Margaret share her inspirations. The way the sunlight hit the flowers in her garden, the memories of childhood meadows, the quiet joy of capturing small, beautiful moments. For Margaret, it felt surreal to see her family so engaged, so genuinely impressed. All her life, she had been the caretaker, the listener. Now, for the first time, she was the one sharing something deeply personal, and it felt wonderful. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, Lily suggested, "Grandma, you should post some of these online. People would love them." Margaret chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh, I don't know about that. I wouldn't even know where to start." But the idea stuck in her mind. Over the next few weeks, her family continued to lift her up in small but meaningful ways. David brought her a set of high-quality brushes and canvases. Her daughter-in-law framed one of her favorite pieces and hung it proudly in their living room. And Lily, determined as ever, sat down with Margaret one afternoon and showed her how to create an Instagram account. "Just to share with friends and family," Lily said with a grin as she uploaded a photo of Margaret holding one of her paintings. Margaret laughed, a little shy but also secretly excited. "All right," she said, "but don't expect too much. I'm just having fun." That night, as she sat in her armchair with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with notifications, likes, comments, and messages from people who had stumbled across her art and were full of kind words. "Beautiful work," one comment read. "Such joy in these colors. Hard to believe you just started painting. What a gift." Margaret stared at the screen, her heart swelling with disbelief and gratitude. What had started as a quiet, personal dream was slowly beginning to ripple out into the world. And for the first time, Margaret started to wonder, what if this was just the beginning? At first, Margaret thought her little Instagram account would stay just that, little. She expected a few likes here and there from friends, neighbors, and maybe some distant relatives. But within a week of her granddaughter Lily posting that first photo, something surprising began to happen. Her art started to spread. It began subtly, an encouraging comment from a stranger, a few shares on Facebook. Then one morning, Margaret woke up to find that one of her floral paintings, a cheerful bouquet of sunflowers against a deep blue background, had been shared by a popular art account with thousands of followers. Her phone buzzed nonstop that day, notifications piling up so fast she could hardly keep up. "Your colors are so alive," one person wrote. "I'm in tears reading your story." "You're amazing," said another. A third message read simply, "I needed to see this today. Thank you." Margaret sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around her mug of tea, staring at the screen in disbelief. Mary, her daughter, stopped by later and nearly dropped her purse when she saw the growing follower count. "Mom, do you realize how many people are seeing your work?" Margaret shook her head, still a little dazed. "I never imagined anything like this. I just wanted to paint." But it didn't stop there. Local newspapers reached out for interviews. Bloggers wrote heartfelt articles about Margaret's journey. Even a popular lifestyle magazine contacted Lily, asking if they could feature Margaret's story in an upcoming issue. Her modest living room began to fill with letters and emails from people around the world, young and old, sharing how inspired they were by her courage to begin something new at 85. Some told her they had always wanted to try art, but felt too intimidated. Others said they'd finally signed up for that pottery class or started playing piano again because of her. One message stood out in particular. It was from a woman in her 40s who had recently lost her job and was feeling hopeless. She wrote, "Seeing your paintings and reading about your journey gave me hope. I realized it's never too late to start over. Thank you for reminding me that life still has so much to offer." Margaret wiped away tears as she read, her heart full. What touched her most wasn't the growing follower count or the sudden burst of attention. It was the connection. She had spent so much of her life giving quietly, behind the scenes, never seeking recognition. Now, her simple act of following a lifelong dream was encouraging others to do the same. She continued to paint, posting her work regularly with little captions about what inspired each piece. Her favorite part? Reading the comments and hearing stories from fellow dreamers all over the world. One evening, as she sat with Lily scrolling through her feed, Margaret smiled softly and said, "I never thought picking up a paintbrush would take me this far." Lily hugged her. "And you're just getting started, Grandma." Margaret wasn't sure where the path would lead next, but one thing was certain. The dream that had waited 85 years to bloom had finally opened its petals, and the world was watching. As Margaret's online presence blossomed, her life began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. Invitations poured in, requests to speak at local events, offers to display her paintings in small galleries, even an email from a well-known art podcast asking if she'd be willing to share her story on air. At first, Margaret was overwhelmed. "I'm just an old lady who likes to paint," she told Lily with a laugh. But with a little encouragement, she began to say yes to some of these opportunities, stepping out of her comfort zone yet again. Her first art exhibit was held at the local library, a cozy space filled with rows of books, and now, for a weekend, the bright colors of Margaret's imagination. Friends, neighbors, and strangers alike came to see her work in person, pausing thoughtfully in front of each canvas. Margaret stood near the entrance, clutching a small bouquet of daisies that someone had handed her, beaming with quiet pride. "I never expected anything like this," she whispered to her son David as he squeezed her hand. "It feels like a dream." Despite the growing attention, Margaret was careful to keep her feet firmly on the ground. She still woke early each morning, brewed her favorite chamomile tea, and spent quiet hours by her window, painting whatever moved her that day. A bluebird in the garden, the swirl of clouds before a summer storm, the memory of a childhood picnic. Fame hadn't changed her heart. If anything, it deepened her gratitude for the simple joy of creating. She often turned down offers that felt too overwhelming or flashy. "I don't need to be famous," she'd say with a smile. "I just want to keep doing what makes me happy." What surprised her most was how her art began to weave deeper connections within her own community. At church, people would stop her after service to say how inspired they were. The clerk at the grocery store would ask about her latest project. Even her longtime mail carrier left a handwritten note of congratulations in her mailbox one afternoon. And perhaps the sweetest surprise of all came one day when Lily handed Margaret a small box. Inside was a collection of beautifully printed greeting cards, each one featuring one of Margaret's paintings. "We thought it'd be a nice way for people to have a little piece of your art," Lily said, eyes shining. Margaret was speechless. "I don't know what to say, this is just wonderful." As the seasons changed, Margaret continued to paint, to share, and to inspire. She never let the spotlight distract her from what mattered most. The peace she felt when her brush met canvas, and the quiet thrill of bringing something new and beautiful into the world. At the end of each day, as the sun dipped low and the sky blushed pink, Margaret would sit back in her chair, brush resting on the table, and smile to herself. Because no matter how much her life had shifted, the heart of it remained the same. A woman, a dream, and the simple, extraordinary joy of finally letting her art speak. As the months passed, Margaret noticed that something had shifted deep within her, something that went far beyond the recognition or the kind words from strangers online. Painting had awakened a part of her soul that she hadn't even realized had grown quiet over the years. For the first time in a long while, Margaret felt a lightness in her step, a kind of quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from within. Friends and family often commented on how vibrant she looked. Her eyes brighter, her laughter more frequent, her entire presence somehow fuller. "It's like you found a new spark, Mom," David said one afternoon as they walked through her garden. Margaret smiled, wiping her hands on her apron after clipping fresh roses. "I suppose I have. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd set aside until I started painting. It feels like I'm finally whole again." What Margaret cherished most was how painting gave her a new sense of purpose each day. Each blank canvas was a promise, a chance to explore her thoughts and feelings in a way words never could. On days when her energy was low or her arthritis flared, she still found comfort simply sitting at her table, mixing colors or sketching out ideas for her next piece. She discovered that art had a way of healing in unexpected ways. Memories she had long tucked away, some joyful, some painful, began to surface as she painted, and she welcomed them all. Her brushstrokes told stories of her childhood, her years as a young mother, her quiet moments of grief, and her bursts of joy. Margaret realized that her art was not just about pretty pictures. It was a reflection of her life, with all its layers, textures, and shades. One of her proudest achievements was finishing a large canvas she titled Seasons, a sweeping landscape that depicted the vibrant bloom of spring, the full glow of summer, the rich colors of fall, and the quiet hush of winter. To her, it represented her own journey, a life that had seen every season and come through beautifully. Mary, visiting one evening, stood before the painting and blinked back tears. "Mom, this is incredible. It's like your whole life is here." Margaret nodded, her eyes shining. "That's exactly what I hoped." She began to feel a deeper connection not only to herself, but to others who were inspired by her courage to start something new. Letters continued to arrive from people of all ages who had been moved to chase their own forgotten dreams. Margaret kept every letter in a special box, rereading them whenever she needed a reminder of just how far a single brave step could ripple outward. But more than anything, Margaret found peace. She no longer thought of age as a limitation or of time as something slipping away. Instead, she embraced each day as a gift, a canvas waiting to be filled. And in those quiet moments, brush in hand, Margaret felt something she hadn't in years, complete and utterly content. She was, at last, exactly where she was meant to be. Margaret's journey soon became more than just her own personal triumph. It blossomed into a beacon of hope for her entire community. What had started as a quiet dream at her kitchen table had now ignited a wave of inspiration, touching the hearts of neighbors, friends, and even complete strangers. The local community center, recognizing Margaret's impact, invited her to lead a small painting workshop for seniors. At first, she hesitated. "Oh, I'm no teacher," she told Emily, the art instructor who had first welcomed her into class. But Emily smiled and said, "Margaret, you don't have to be perfect to inspire others. Just share your heart." And so, one sunny morning, Margaret stood in front of a room full of eager faces, many of them seniors like herself who had long believed their creative days were behind them. Some had never picked up a paintbrush before. Others had once dabbled in art, but let it slip away as life's demands took over. Margaret began simply, sharing her story, how she had waited 85 years to finally pursue her passion, how terrifying and wonderful it felt to take that first step, and how it had changed her life in ways she never imagined. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding, eyes shining with a mixture of recognition and hope. The workshop became a monthly event, growing steadily as more and more people joined. Margaret found immense joy in guiding others, gently encouraging them to let go of their fears and simply try. She often said, "It's not about making something perfect, it's about giving yourself permission to begin." Beyond the workshops, Margaret's story was shared in local newspapers and even featured on a regional TV segment. The headline read, 85-year-old artist proves it's never too late to follow your dreams. The story rippled far beyond her town, sparking online conversations and inspiring other seniors across the country to dust off old dreams or discover new ones. Margaret's little house, once a quiet place of routine, became a hub of creative energy. Visitors dropped by to see her latest pieces, ask questions, or simply sit and chat over tea while admiring the art that adorned her walls. Margaret always welcomed them warmly, saying, "If my journey can help even one person believe in themselves, it's all been worth it." Perhaps the most touching moment came one spring afternoon when Lily, her granddaughter, stood before Margaret's easel, eyes full of pride. "Grandma," she said softly, "you didn't just change your life. You changed mine. Watching you be so brave has made me realize I can do anything I set my mind to." Margaret hugged her tightly, tears welling in her eyes. "That's all I ever wanted. For you, for everyone. To know that your dreams matter." And so, Margaret's legacy grew, not just through her beautiful paintings, but through the countless lives she touched by proving that dreams don't come with an expiration date. She became a quiet force of hope and a living reminder that it's never too late to rediscover yourself. Her message was simple but powerful. No matter your age, your story isn't over, and the best chapters might still be waiting to be written. Margaret Stevens' journey is living proof that the dreams we hold in our hearts are never truly lost. They simply wait, patiently, for their moment to bloom. At 85 years old, Margaret did what so many only dare to imagine. She gave herself permission to start, and in doing so, she transformed her life in ways even she couldn't have predicted. What began as a quiet, personal wish became a radiant force of inspiration, reminding us all that it's never too late to chase something that matters. Margaret's story isn't about fame or perfection. It's about courage, the kind of quiet bravery it takes to step outside your comfort zone and try something new, no matter your age or circumstances. She taught us that fulfillment doesn't come from flawless results, but from honoring the whispers of your own soul. Through every brushstroke, Margaret discovered not just her talent, but her voice. And as she shared her art with the world, she found connection, purpose, and a renewed sense of joy that touched everyone around her. If Margaret were here with us today, I think she'd say something simple and wise. Whatever it is you've been waiting for, stop waiting. The time to begin is now. So let me ask you, what dream have you been quietly holding on to? What passion have you tucked away for someday? Whether it's learning a new skill, exploring a creative hobby, or simply allowing yourself to try something outside the norm, Margaret's story is your reminder that you are never too old, and it is never too late. We would love to hear your thoughts and stories. Is there a dream you've finally started pursuing? Or is there one you're ready to begin? Share it with us in the comments. You never know who your words might inspire. And if Margaret's incredible journey touched your heart today, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Here, we celebrate stories of resilience, courage, and the unstoppable spirit of those who remind us that age is just a number and that dreams can bloom at any time. Because it's never too late to dream.